What's up, guys? Welcome to episode 7 of the Flippy Life podcast. I'm here with my co-host, Myles Berrio, and we look forward to providing you a ton of value in this episode.
Hey, guys. You guys aren't going to really be able to hear my co-host, Mr. Vaughn over here, but you can at least hear me talking. So we are actually recording a podcast right now. So any of you guys hopping on right now, if you have any questions about real estate, please ask any question you have about real estate, and we will definitely talk about it live on here. So, but yeah, dude, we're going to have to figure out how to do that then, how to go live.
Absolutely.
But let's just kind of chime in. So the idea is that people get started with wholesaling and they get a deal under contract, and the challenge for them is like, oh, dang, okay, what title company do I use? What closing attorney do I use? But one of the biggest questions, I don't say one of the biggest questions, but I've had people say, man, Myles, I'm kind of worried though, if I do this deal, like the seller's going to see that I'm making like 10,000 or 15,000 or 20,000. Sometimes, 30, 40 grand on their first deal or something, and they're kind of worried, like, how do I get around that? Like, what would you say, Myles? So I know kind of what I would always say, but let's just jump into that. What would you say to someone who's kind of worried about, my seller's going to see that I'm making 10, 20, 30, 40, whatever K, on this deal?
Yes. So for us, man, it's, I have my acquisitions team. They're the one that's talking to sellers right now. I haven't talked to a seller or a buyer in a while, but when I was doing all acquisitions, our biggest thing, and when I do training for our acquisitions team now, it's all about being open, honest, and transparent up front. Right. So like our guys are not even allowed to make an offer on the first call. Because it's all about building a relationship, building rapport, and getting them to know, like, and trust you on that first call. So part of our script in that first call is setting advanced agreements. So, once we talk to them about their property, pre-qualify them, the 4 pillars of pre-qualification, right? So condition of the property, timeline to sell, motivation, and price. A big part of them is like, okay, Mr. Seller, now that I've gotten information, I think I got enough information to take this back to underwriting and get you an offer. But let me tell you a little bit about who we are and what we do, right? So we're telling them up front that, hey, this is a property. It sounds like something we may be interested in. However, we do all types of investing strategies, and that also includes, assignments of contracts. It includes buying wholes. It includes fix and flips. And our primary focus being owner financing. Once this comes back from underwriting, I'll be able to give you a better understanding of what our exit strategy is. However, we're going to be upfront and honest with you from day one. So if we need to come back and renegotiate because the repairs are more than what we thought they were going to be, we're going to let you know. If we're not taking this property down ourselves, we're going to let you know. However, we will help you find a buyer for the agreed upon price that we agreed upon, right? So upfront, open, honesty, and transparency from the beginning is a huge thing. I'll put that out there first and foremost. Even with that being said, though, however, if you're going to make $20,000, $30,000, $40,000, or even more on an assignment fee, do you really want them to see that? Now, your non-savvy seller, when they get that HUD, it's going to show the purchase price and the sales price at the top of the HUD, right? Your assignment fee is going to be way down the bottom of that HUD.
Right.
So when you tell them that you're finding another buyer for them and that buyer is paying your fee, meaning your fee as the wholesaler or the person that's assigning the contract, they should already know that your buyer's paying that fee, right?
Right.
So they may just skim over that or might not even see it. Right. However, there is a good chance that they will see it, right? So how do we get past that?
Yeah.
So, what were you going to say?
Yeah, well, I was just going to say, so yeah, transparency and honesty is super, super important. And guys, if you're hopping on right now, we are talking about, what is the psychology for a seller when they see that you might be making this like assignment fee, $15,000, $20,000, $30,000 assignment fee, right? And you're kind of worried, like, oh my gosh, what are they going to think? So I guess I'm going to start from really just the psychology for the newest person getting started, because I think that was what really helped me, first of all, just feel comfortable and understand that, first of all, you're bringing value to the marketplace, right? You're bringing value to the seller. And I think, when I first got started, I really had the mindset of like, because I just thought that's all we're doing is like, all I'm doing is just like, assigning a piece of paper. We'll just talk about like flipping contracts. Like I'm just flipping the contract, and there's so much more that is involved, right? You are spending time, which has a cost to it, whether you've calculated it to a dollar amount, but you are spending time marketing to find sellers. You're spending time negotiating, having these conversations to get the best deal with the seller, and then you're giving and providing them an opportunity to get a property sold that they may not have been able to get sold anywhere else or without you. In some degree or another, in the sense that you're able to find these buyers, because they're not, a lot of times the sellers aren't spending time, obviously, like finding investors and buyers for them to buy their house. So you're providing all of this value. You should get paid for that, right? You should get paid
Absolutely.
for that value that you're bringing and helping that seller out. Now, secondly, going into, I'm kind of worried what the seller might think. Here's also just a practical thing as well. Utilizing a closing attorney or title company that does a separate buyer and seller HUD. And I think that,
Absolutely.
like, when I first heard that, I mean, it just cleared up so much of the just confrontation and the confusion of that kind of experience, because I never had that situation. I never had a seller at the closing table say, oh my gosh, wait a minute, you're making $30,000 on this deal. Like, that's insane. Because I made sure, and I teach this, right, to my students, when you're looking for a closing attorney or title company, if you're getting into wholesaling real estate, here's what's important. Two things. Number one, you want to find a closing attorney or title company that is investor friendly, right? They understand things that, involve investment strategies, whether it's subject to owner seller finance, even things like novation agreements or, wholesaling or whatever the case is, right? But that's not enough, right? Because there's some closing attorneys, that understand, some of these strategies like owner financing. They can, draft up a promissory note and things like that. But they may be like, when it comes to wholesaling, a little like iffy about wholesaling. So you need to make sure that not only are they investor friendly, but they do a separate buyer and seller HUD. I have never had an issue when it comes to a seller, because the seller never sees what the buyer, when a closing attorney does a separate seller and buyer HUD, the seller sees what you agree to with the seller, what they're selling the property for, which is great. It's not like you're convincing them or you're putting a gun to their head and forcing them, they agree to that price. That's why you guys went on a contract and they signed a piece of paper. They agree to the price. They're getting what they agree to, right? And then whatever you're making on the back end, that has nothing to do with them. It doesn't pertain to them, because they're getting and receiving exactly what it is that they already agreed to. But that separate buyer and seller HUD, guys, if you're listening to this, is really, really important to do your due diligence, even with the closing attorney or title company, to make sure they do a separate buyer and seller HUD, so you don't really have that problem either.
Yeah. Now let's talk about it. If you can't find somebody that's willing to do a separate buyers and sellers HUD, because there are attorneys out there and title companies that refuse to do it, right? They think it's ethically wrong or whatever it may be. So let's talk about other ways to get around that. Like, for me, we very rarely do separate buyer and seller HUDs, just because we're always upfront and honest. But it's almost the same way as it goes to, you don't want the buyer seeing how much you're making, right? The other option is to do a double close. It costs you a little bit of money to create those two separate seller HUDs, and you got two sets of closing costs. But if your assignment fee is big enough, which is probably why you're doing a double close anyways, it's worth it. Right, it's worth it. Paying that little extra, the little bit of extra fees, rather than the deal falling apart at the closing table. So you can do that from a seller standpoint. You can do that from a buyer standpoint, because if you do a double close, the seller's is only seeing what you're paying for the property, and then on the other end of it, the buyer's side, they're only seeing what they're paying for the property. So nobody sees. It's almost like a blind close, because nobody sees what you're making in the middle. Now, you probably do have to go out to get transactional funding if you can't find an attorney or a title company that's willing to use the buyer's funds to close. And that's a whole different story, for another day. We may be able to talk about it today, but there's multiple ways. Yeah, there's multiple ways to hide the fee that you're making as far as an assignment fee from the seller. Same thing goes for the buyer.
And whether you're doing a separate buyer and seller HUD, at closing, you should always be honest. And so I just want to put that out there. So we are always open and transparent about what we're doing. But in terms of what the actual end number is, they just may not know what fee you're actually receiving. So what we say and what I teach, my team is when you're talking to a seller, first of all, that's actually one of the strategies that we talk about anyways. We let the seller know right away, hey, especially if we know we're going to wholesale this deal, we'll just say, hey, this looks like a great property, but it just doesn't really fit our business model. I say that all the time, man, this looks like, man, I would love to buy this, but it just doesn't necessarily fit our business model. But I have a lot of other investor friends in the network. I have a lot of other people that do what I do. And everyone has different strategies and things like that. So let me just kind of go to work for you. Let me see if maybe I can find someone who's willing to pay your purchase price. And there's no fee you have to pay. You don't have to pay me any fee or anything like that. I'll work that out on the back end with them. But I just want to try and help you. I know we were trying to get this deal done, and I know you're not, really going to be where I need to be cash wise on the numbers. And I don't, obviously I'm not going to try and convince you. So, but at least I can do is try and help you get the deal done. So let me just see if I can find someone who can pay your price. Boom. Absolutely. So you're already telling them, let me see if I can find someone who will pay your price. Let me see if I can find someone who will pay your price. Is there anyone who's going to be like, no, I don't want you to go to work for me for free and find someone who can pay my price, right? Now, maybe their price is $30,000, $50,000, $60,000 as a purchase, but then you find someone who's willing to pay 70 or 80 or 90, right? If someone is able to pay $100,000 for something that you got under contract for with the seller for $50,000, did you not find someone who could pay their price? Of course, right? They can pay their price and some extra, right? So it's still being honest and open that, hey, I'm finding someone to buy this property. You're letting them know what you're doing, but you're letting them know they're going to be able to pay your price, and I'm going to help you out. You don't have to pay a fee. We're going to work it out on the back end. That would be the back end. Their price, you with the price with the buyer. Yeah. So. But yeah, so that's another way. But yeah, double closing. If you guys don't understand the idea of what a double close is, what it basically just means is typically when you're wholesaling real estate, and guys, if you're listening to this on Spotify or iTunes, we got like Instagram live going on right now, so I'm looking back and forth here for watching this on YouTube as well. But by the way, if you're hopping in on Instagram live, my co-host and I, we are recording our podcast. We are live right now. This is the first time we're doing this, so we're trying to figure it out. It's so funny because they necessarily can't hear you right now. They hear me. But if you have any questions in real estate that you would love for us to kind of answer towards the end of this, definitely ask. So where was I? Totally just forgot what I was saying.
We're just talking about being, how you shape the conversation, right? Is a very important thing, right? So when you tell them that, hey, this might not be a good fit for us and, our strategy, our business model, so we probably won't be taking it down ourselves, but we have this expansive network over here of other investors that have different exit strategies than we do. Right. So let us go to work for you and find you a buyer. As far as I'm concerned and you're concerned, it doesn't add anything to the price. The buyer is going to pay my fee. Right. So I'll work that out with them on the back end. But my job is to go to work and try to help you find a buyer that's willing to pay your price. So once you frame it that way, like I said, who's not going to let you go to work for them to get somebody to find to get you to find somebody that's willing to pay their price, right? Right. So.
And actually, I remember now what I was double closing. Yeah. We were going to talk about double close, just so you guys understand double closing. So if you are wholesaling real estate, you are not closing. I mean, there's wholetailing, which is another strategy, but actually wholesaling, you are not actually closing on the property yourself, right? So you are going under contract with the seller, and then you are finding an end buyer who will basically, you're assigning the rights for that end buyer to buy the property that you just got under contract. Now, double close, and a lot of times this happens with funds, because that's what we do now. Today is double closing with hedge funds, because sometimes the hedge funds just don't do assignments. They just will do a double close. So what will happen is you close on the property, with the buyer when they bring their funds, and it's a separate transaction, and then they do a different transaction with the seller, and then they close there with the seller. But it's two actual closings, two actual closing costs too. Like, it's legit two separate closings. So there are individuals and companies that do what's called transactional funding, right? So they will actually provide transactional funding for that double close to actually happen, for you to be able to do it. Because sometimes certain title companies they're not going to fund that transaction, but the transactional funding individual will fund that transaction. So their money will go in and kind of sit there until it comes back out to them, and they might charge even like a point or two or something for their money to be out there until the buyer's funds goes through and pays off to the seller. So
absolutely. And let me just speak real quick on, knowing when to do a double close, right? From the seller standpoint, you should be able to get a lot of that from the initial conversation with the seller. So if they're acting kind of finicky, or you're spending time with them on the phone or in person, and they seem like somebody that would take offense to you making money off the deal, maybe that's a sign that you might want to double close. Right. We frame everything in our first conversation that, we do this to make a living. This is how we put money on the table, and matching them with a buyer, we get paid by the buyer and so forth. And we ask them, in some situations we make $1,000, some situations we make $5,000, some situations we make $25,000. Are you okay if I make $25,000 on this? And just asking that question hypothetically, right? Yeah. In the conversation with the seller,
that'd be an interesting conversation.
Yeah, they'll give you that. They'll give you that answer. And sometimes I like to joke with them, right? So I say, hey, the buyer pays our fee, and sometimes it's $1,000, sometimes it's $5,000, and heck, it's even been $25,000, and I'll kind of laugh and just see how they react, right? Right. So in their response to that joking question or statement will kind of give you an idea if you should, put a note in there to double close on that transaction. So the same thing goes for the buyer's end too. When we vet buyers, that's the first thing we ask them is, do you have a problem with me making money off this transaction? And, 100% of the time right off the bat, most of them are going to say no. So then I ask, well, what if I make $100,000 off the transaction? Are you okay with that? And then you really start to see the true colors come out, right?
Everybody's got a price.
Everybody's got a price. So then you can really get make a note. Do I need to double close this transaction if that's the, if this is the buyer I'm working with? Right. So use that on both ends of the transaction.
Right. Right, guys. So that's really kind of what we wanted to share, at least about if you're wholesaling. We get that question, what do I do if the seller, how do I, what would we do, right? If, you're worried about the seller seeing what you're making. And again, just kind of reiterating, is it reiterating? That's not the word. To reiterize, what we were originally talking about was, number one, just the mindset that you are bringing value. You need to understand that you shouldn't feel bad if you are going to make a large spread on a wholesale deal, because that is the nature of this business, and everything's about a value. If someone is willing to sell their property for, let's say, $50,000, they see value in that. That's why they're selling it at that. If there is a end buyer who's willing to buy the property for $150,000, they see value in them buying it at $150K. And if you made $100,000 because of that, everyone got the value out of what they felt they were either spending or getting, back whatever amount. If they're selling the property, they're getting cash, or if they're buying the property, getting a deed. Everyone got the value, back that they were wanting. So that's just number one. And then number two, again, just being honest and transparent, letting them know exactly what it is that you are doing. So, if you are at a closing table situation where they do see that you're making money, or there's money, they know that you were making money. It wasn't a surprise, which it's funny because, sometimes I guess you could say some people just aren't thinking about it, but you would think if someone is providing a service, they're getting paid some way or another, right? No one's doing stuff for free. Yeah. But, you'll have sellers that are obviously kind of like, I guess, assuming that you're going to just help them out and not make a dime. But I think obviously it's just always important to be transparent and let them know. We always let them know, hey, this doesn't necessarily work for our business model, but would love to help you. I'd love to help you find someone who could pay your price. I know you're probably pretty busy, and this is what we do all day, every day. So it wouldn't be anything difficult for us to see if there's someone who'd be willing to pay your price. And then you're letting them know right then and there, hey, I'm assigning this deal. Without saying I'm assigning it, you're saying we're going to find someone who'd be willing to buy this property. So that's, obviously very helpful. And then you have the double closing option where you can actually get transactional funding to double close on the property. So let's say the seller wants $50,000 and you have a buyer who's going to get, who's going to buy $150,000. Well, you can get transactional funding in there to actually fund that first transaction, that $50,000, right? So then when you're at the closing table, there was already a transaction performed. Those funds are at title. So then the buyer will come and bring their money, and they're not seeing anything that happened in the previous transaction because it's a different transaction. They're just buying the property of what they're buying a property for, a cash transaction, and then obviously the person who provided the transactional funding is going to get their money back when the buyer pays, and buys the property. But they might charge obviously a little bit of money, which is another conversation. But I don't know if I talked to you about that, Vaughn, but that's actually the sixth business that I've actually started is transactional funding, and we actually are really excited. We got about 2 projects in right now. One's a little bit smaller; it's about a $7,500 deal, and then another one's like around $3,000. But it's being able to do transactional funding, or be able to do what you could call micro lending, right? Or if you're in sub 2, Pace calls it gator lending, but you're providing funds for someone to be able to have a transaction be performed with title. So that's another conversation, another podcast. We're not getting into that right now.
Absolutely.
But anyway, we want to keep these episodes short and concise and just really packed with some value, so you guys can just be listening to tons of different audios or tons of different episodes to learn a lot of different things. But hey, we have a random question, real estate. Are you ready to answer a random real estate question on this episode?
Absolutely. And before we get into that real quick, I just wanted to take all this that we talked about value, right? It goes back to the age-old question of what's the value of my property? What's my property worth, right? And when you ask somebody that, or somebody asks you that, you say it's worth what somebody's willing to pay for it.
It's worth what someone's willing to pay. Yep.
So if I'm talking to a seller and I'm willing to pay $30,000 for it and they're okay with that, and then I present it to a buyer and they're willing to pay $50,000 for it, that's what the value of the property is to them. Right. Well, that difference is the value I provide by bringing that property to the buyer.
Yep.
Right?
Exactly.
So it's not that easy. If we make it sound easy, but all the work that we do in between. Is what we're worth, right? That's the value that we bring to the industry, and we got to get paid as well. We got to put food on our tables. We can't just go connect sellers and buyers for free, right?
So it's not Connect 4. That's the only time you're connecting the dots for free here. No, I'm just kidding. Actually, not really. You gotta buy that too, guys. So sorry, there's no free connection here.
Exactly. So I would kind of look at it that way as, the value is what somebody else is willing to pay for it. So when I get a property, if I do a really good job of building a rapport, building a relationship, getting that seller to know, like, and trust me, and we come up with an agreeable price and we put that on paper by signing that purchase and sale agreement. Right. If I present that to a buyer's list that I've worked my tail off building an expansive buyer's list and solid buyers, and a buyer comes out of that list that's willing to pay a $20 or $30 or $40 or $50,000 spread, right? All that was created because of the work I've put in to create that value to that buyer. Right. So absolutely. That's the way you got to look at it. So. I didn't mean to interrupt. Let's go back. Let's answer this question real quick.
Yeah, we're gonna answer a real estate question, guys. I promise we're gonna get better. I say we. I threw Vaughn in this, but I'm gonna get better at this technology stuff here. So we got some people on live, but unfortunately, they didn't really hear much of Vaughn's messages here because next time we do this, we're gonna try to go live through the platform. So you can hear and see both of us. Right. But guys, I try to get you guys on here, even at least hear my part. And actually, you know what? Maybe we won't go live where you hear. Maybe we'll do something so random that no one does, where you only hear one side of the conversation so you can go listen to the episode. So now you got to go to the podcast and go subscribe and go listen to it. So anyway,
that's true.
But there is a random question here. I don't want to say random, but it's a real estate question. And guys, we just totally threw this in here. We just thought it'd be fun. We love real estate. It's just fun to just kind of answer real estate questions and talk about it. So I am .ep3, so that's the person who asked the question. They said, how would you structure a novation agreement when the seller is in pre-foreclosure? Boom. How would you structure a novation agreement when the seller's in pre-foreclosure? So I will let you maybe touch on the pre-foreclosure part, and we kind of go back and forth on this. But first of all, let's just talk about how you could structure a novation agreement in general, right? So structuring the novation agreement in general is, for anyone to understand or trying to figure out, like, what is a novation agreement? So there's a way and a strategy where you can actually partner with the seller without having to buy the property. right? So, let's just say, like, actually just recently there was a deal where the seller was he was like going back and forth on a price where I really just didn't want to have to pay cash for, right? It was like $190,000 cash. And I think the rehab budget was going to be around $35,000, $40,000. Now, instead of me buying the property for, like, let's say $180,000 cash and then putting another $40,000 into it, which is okay if there's enough value, right? But I would have to raise that money. I would either have to have three things. I would either have to have that amount of money cash, 180 plus 40, which if we do the math on that, what is that? 8, 9, 10. Well, that's 220. 40, so I'd have to 220. So I'd have to have $220,000 in my bank account cash, which I would never suggest spending $220,000 of your own cash to go do a fix and flip. But if you do that and you use your own money, do your thing. But I would either have to have that cash to do it, or I would have to go to a bank and get traditional financing, right? Or hard money, right? Or I would have to use private money, right? Use private money to go do that thing. Now, if I'm going to use private money, I would have to raise $220,000 of private money. Now, let me ask you guys this question. What if I told the seller, how about we work together? I think this would actually work out better for both of us. Instead of you trying to sell it for $180,000 and it needs a good bit of repairs, how about I just fund the renovation, I'll manage the entire construction, and we go and sell it on the market together. So now you'll make more money. I can make more money. It's a win-win for both of us. And A, I never actually had to buy the property from the seller. And B, the seller doesn't have to sell it for less because the property still needs work, because now we're going to sell it on the market in a really good market value, HGTV, beautiful condition. And then thirdly, what the most beautiful part of it is, I wouldn't have to be raising a $220,000, because now I only have to raise what? The rehab budget. Now I only need the $40,000 to be able to do the job. So I raise $40,000, renovate that bad boy, we put it in the market. They'll get the 180 that they originally wanted, plus maybe whatever you guys agree to. It's all negotiable. Yeah. I get my money back to pay the private money lender, and then whatever that profit is, I mean, it's all negotiable. We could just split it 50-50. So now I just made money that, in a deal that maybe I wasn't going to be able to make money some other way, right? That could have been a dead deal, but now I was able to actually make it a deal because I didn't have to raise as much. And then the seller could make a little bit more money instead of having to sell it, sell the property with the repairs that it needed. So
in that situation too, you got to look at your cash on cash return too.
Yes,
right?
Cash on cash return, exactly.
So there's a big there's a big difference coming up with $40,000 or putting $40,000 into a project versus putting $220,000 into a project. Yeah.